Wait, no. Welcome to the second Ask the Pastor Anything event. I'm your host, Peter Rinaldi. Before we get into specifics about what's going to happen tonight, let me just say this is a two-sided event in that we are going to be asking the pastor any question we want, and also this is a recording of our podcast called Religiosanity, which you can listen to if you just search Religiosanity on Apple Podcasts or SoundCloud. So the way we like to begin those episodes is by saying this: Religiosanity,
episode
114.
That's correct.
Back with Pastor Andrew, and we're live. And now I'm going to hit the audience for applause. Yes. The second annual, well, I shouldn't say annual, the second version of this event. The way we're going to do it is the people live in-house will always get priority to ask questions. The second priority is going to be the people who wrote out anonymous questions on the cards. And the third priority is going to be people on the chat. If you're watching at home, ask your question in the chat. Just write it in the chat. You can even come up with an anonymous account and chat and write it in the chat if it's a scary question or something like that, or something you always... He loves scary questions. If you remember last time we were here, there was some scary questions. And there's some very scary questions in here. And we're going to get to them. If we do not get to a question, I promise that he will answer those questions on a future episode of Religiosanity. So not one of your questions will go unanswered at some point. That is so. Also, all right, Nadim, get ready. Let's test the timer. This is the real, there we go. The 2-minute timer is off and running.
I don't know. With our attendance, we can give them 20 minutes. Or
We only have 2 minutes. Okay, reset the timer. So that is always at the ready for us. Luckily, we have Nadim up there running everything for us, doing sound, video, timer, everything. So I'm going to look into the audience now. If anyone has a question to be asked live right now, raise their hand. If they don't, I will go to a card. First question. Laura.
So, Pastor Andrew, who is your favorite theologian? The one who aligns with your heart and your head, and why?
Start the timer.
That's quite difficult. There'll be a number of people, but probably those who influenced me most were my teachers from the seminary in Prague and in Edinburgh. My professor of Hebrew, Jan Heller, my professor of New Testament theology, Petr Pokorný, and in Edinburgh, it was professor of Ugaritic studies, and that was Nicholas or Nick Wyatt. And those would be probably those who had the biggest influence over me. And then there are, those are for very specific reasons and in a relatively narrow areas, even though those Prague professors were mostly published in German. Petr Pokorný has a number of books published or translated into English, and for instance, until now I'm using his translation and commentary of Gospel of Thomas.
can I ask a supplementary question to that?
Yeah.
And Nadim, we could just stop the timer for this one. What are some of the dead theologians, or the classic, particularly the writers that you like?
Unfortunately, those two Prague professors are dead. I lost them, yes, in the last decade. So they are still influential over me. So, I think that answers. There are, of course, like the theologians of the Hebrew Bible, mostly Germans again. They're like Gunkel, for instance, Hermann Gunkel, and so on. I know about them. I read them. I consider them to be interesting, but in biblical sciences, that's the way I'm calling it, in biblical sciences, there has been a substantial development in thought. And so, yes, they are influential, but they are influential for specific reasons. Then we can go into anthropology and archaeology and so on and so forth. And then those would be, again, that kind of situation. So those who are living are the most influential on my thinking, even though I'm looking back at some aspects of their published works which influenced me.
Mm-hmm. This is a question that I have a card for, but it is not anonymous. It's from John LaCicero in the audience. What you said about the Exodus, is the story of Moses true? Start the time.
No, that's unfair, having a timer for this. But it depends on how you view the truthfulness. And I think that I preached about it here in this church during pandemic when we did the series of these sermons, overcoming the biblical fundamentalism or general American fundamentalism. And I consider that to be true, but not to be historical. And that is a difference. I know that many people will see it as a contradiction, but for me it is not contradiction. And I go back to the definition, Hellenistic definition of myth. You heard that from me a number of times, even on the podcast, that
yes.
The myths are things which never were and always are. And I think it is very kind of tantalizingly interesting answer to that. So it never happened as it is being narrated and so on, but it is still happening. I think that the liberation from the slavery is still happening. It has been influencing the civil rights movement in America. It has been influencing the black spirituals. We had that concert here, and one of those famous, songs which are having the biggest impact on people is "Wade Through the Water." Mm-hmm. And that's exactly it. And that's what I mean. It is a powerful message which is coming to us, and I see that we just finished the time.
Yes, if he goes over time 3 or more times, he gets shocked. I'm not sure if I said that in the beginning, but that is what will happen. So let's count that as one overage. A supplemental question, a question to that was asked anonymously is this. If we are meant to take Jesus' miracles as myth in the way that you just said myth is, which is never was but always, never happened but always was. What was it? Never, always.
Never was and always is.
Never was but always is.
No, that's how I would take the I will take the Jesus' miracle from that category.
So you're saying it's not the same?
It's not the same category. It has a different dimension. It is more for teaching purposes. Those miracles in the New Testament, in Gospels, starting with Gospel of Mark, they have clearly an charismatic, that is a Greek word, sorry, that I'm using, but that we have this kind of discussion, so why not to use it? Yeah. Charismatic means that it is carrying a message. Kerygma in Greek means message. So those are events which are carrying powerful message. They are preaching, they are teaching, there are ways of passing on what Jesus himself had on his mind, or his immediate followers distilled and understood as an important message coming from Jesus and meaning of his life. And if you look at those miracles, they all have this teaching dimension. They are about reaching out to untouchables, healing different ostracized groups within the society. Foreigners are included, and so on. Women are included. Women with bleeding, which would be unclean to all Jewish purposes, say, and so on and so forth. And so there is this very powerful teaching message which is present. Those are almost like, I would call them almost like healing parables. They are like parables. Parables have the message. They have a meaning which yes. They want to pass on us, change our attitude, change our way we are thinking about ourselves, about other people around us, and around the world. And they are mind-opening. And that's the purpose of the miracle. And miracle simply confirms it further by happening. Okay, so that is the whole unit.
Okay, but when you say happening,
mm-hmm.
you don't mean that they happened historically.
Why not? They could. Yeah, I'm not judge on these matters. I cannot say this way or that way. I think that miracles do happen. And I'm not this kind of positivist to say, all of that is pipe dream or made-up stories or whatever. But understand me, that miraculosity of that, if you read really closely Bible, the miracle itself is not what is important. People back then, the other way of approaching it, that people that in that time, they had no problems with miracles.
Yeah.
They knew that miracles were happening. We are the positivist kind of bunch of people who have the problem with that. And how is it possible, and what is the scientific explanation? No, that was not a problem for them. Yeah, they were probably sometimes taken back. Or, they recognized that something out of the ordinary was happening or something like that. But generally, that was not a major problem. The major problem was like, have you heard that he healed bleeding woman?
Yeah.
And right after. And she was 12 years with that problem. After her childbirth probably, or something like that. Now I am bringing a little bit of rationalism to that and so on. And next, what do you think? He healed that girl who was 12 years old as well. And this kind of connection, and that's that miracle which is kind of put into each other. They are kind of overlapping. That's a characteristic feature of, say, Gospel of Mark, that he puts miracles together. But that'll be another kind of...
but start the timer, Nadim, because we need to get out of this. But tell me, though, in 2 minutes, what the difference is...
No, you are counting him. That's wrong.
What is the difference between the parting of the Red Sea miracle and the Lazarus miracle? I mean, I don't understand in your thinking here about how you're saying one of them is about teaching, one of them, and then I said, well, it happened. You said, but maybe. But for the Exodus one, it's a myth, and it didn't happen, but it's always happening. Start the timer.
In that respect, I think that this kind of miracles also are always happening. When we, for instance, reach out to untouchable homeless people and try to care for them, or when our church took a prophetic stand and started to offer asylum clinic, or welcomed refugees when borders were being closed by the highest authority in the nation, by president who publicly declared that Muslim ban, and this church said, "Oh no," and took it that far that we actually almost smuggled in the family in between those two Muslim bans. One was outlawed. So there was that opening window through which we got Koja family here. So those are miracles which are still happening. We only need to open our minds for understanding what is miracle. That'll be another dimension. But the parting of the sea, that is an absolutely beautiful myth of walking through the water or walking on the surface of the water. And you have many examples of that throughout the Middle East. There is even a terminology for that. It is being called chaos camp, the fighting of the forces of chaos. It's a German term here, and Chaoskampf. That's a natural miracle, and you have mutation of that, and you will kill me because it's 4 seconds. But you have an equivalent of that, which is like a domestication of this major cosmic event myth on the Lake of Galilee, on a pond right there, which you can see from shore to shore, when Jesus is walking on a sea. That is a New Testament version of the same myth. And it has, again, a teaching equivalent. It's a parable telling us in the middle of chaotic world, don't be afraid. And as soon as you have Jesus with you in the boat, in the nave, or in the church, you don't need to be worried.
We got a question in the audience from John the Cicero. Wait for the
microphone is coming.
Microphone
I think
is coming. You must get this.
Oh. Once you said that when you first came to this country, you went to Binghamton, and you were very conservative. How did you switch from being so conservative to such a liberal?
Start the timer.
No, that did not happen when I came here. No. Oh. It happened much earlier than that. I was born into an evangelical church. its name was evangelical and so on, but my professors were progressive or dialectical theology, it was called, of Karl Barth, which would be among American liberals, he would be considered ultra-conservative, Karl Barth, but not really, because there was this desire of understand and so on, which propelled me this direction. Great shock for me was, for instance, an encounter with my professor in Edinburgh, Nicholas Wyatt, and his understanding, his anthropology rather than theology, and dealing with it when I was a pastor in Prague, when I was reading one specific book, still have it in my library, and processing it and trying to figure out what does it mean for me, for faith, and for my ministry, really. And I think that I came here already relatively liberal or thinking, and definitely for American circumstances, quite liberal already. And that was how they invited me over, at least those in the selection committee who were able to understand and read in between the lines. While those others were thinking, oh, there is a minister coming from originally communist country, he'll be on our side. Of conservative or ultra-conservative, especially political, which they were quite surprised because, under oppression of communism, I was anti-communist. Under the oppression of capitalism, I would not claim that I'm a communist, but I'm pretty close to a socialist or something like that, because I recognize that it needs to be balanced. And that would be my understanding of the role of theologians and role of church as well. Church should be always there for those who are being ostracized, who are being pushed out, those who are not being taken seriously, and margins. And if the ruling ideology is of one kind, responsibility of the church is to think about it and try to balance it and bring and show alternatives, especially because in societies and in politics it has the tendency of ossifying or being really kind of like extremely hard, and so softening it at least, and poking holes in ideologies. That's the prophetic role, I think. Our function is to poke holes in those societal ideologies. Mm-hmm. So, that's what we are doing. It's not particularly popular because it leads into, people need to think and be active and involved. But, there are people who do that and who go along and who find it tantalizing and inspiring.
Yes. Do you think there should be some ramifications for the pastor when he goes overtime? What
shooting you suggested? Do you have?
I mean,
in America, it's scary. That's talking about.
We'll be lenient with him at the moment, but I think at a certain point, maybe everybody will start doing when they see the zeros, but not now. Here's another anonymous question, unless I have something from the audience. Oh, I do. Leslie.
I'd just like to follow up on some information from you about your experience of how you, as a polyglot, have taken in these texts and researched it. And is there a particular language that you find you are most free in receiving and thinking about information, or you talked about a lot of German texts, but translations that are particularly interesting to you in different languages. In America, there's not a lot of polyglot experience, and I find it fascinating for someone who has researched in so many different languages. or translations of them?
I'm far from being polyglot. I'm not. I'm very limited in my knowledge of other languages. So that I'm occasionally using terminology, that's simply because those are well coined and well established terms. So that's one thing. The other thing is that yes, there are certain ways you can think or you can imagine thinking within the certain languages. So right now I was preparing my sermon and referring to Ugaritic texts, which are a Semitic language older than Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and having special way of expressing itself and special poetry to it. But I'm reading it passively and just with dictionaries and kind of, because it is not punctuated, so it does not have vocals in it, vowels. So it's a puzzle, kind of. But I recently really fell in love with Hawaiian language, for instance, which is of a completely different kind, and shows me how people can think in their languages differently. And there is definitely this dimension that there are languages which are good for something. And I recognize that with Hawaiian language, for instance, and I need to stop. But,
Yes! I'm delighted to see a question here online from Maureen. And she asks, question about eminence and incarnation in reference to the OT. I'm assuming the Old Testament.
Old Testament, yes.
Was there a familiarity with that prior to Christ? I'm assuming she means eminence and incarnation.
Incarnation.
Eminence and incarnation. Let me say it again. Question about eminence and incarnation in reference to the Old Testament. Was there a familiarity with that prior to Christ? Timer.
That there were Christs. All who were anointed were Christs. That's the terminology. So all the kings were Christs, and they were quite familiar with demigods, or partly human and partly divine functions. Definitely, I'm aware of it in Semitic realm. Definitely, I mentioned Ugarit. So the royalty played there a role. And when they were in the office of a king, they were of this kind of semi-divine or partly divine, partly human position. You have other extreme of that, or even more extreme version of it in Egypt, in Egyptian religion, where a king was divine. And treated as divinity. While among the Semites, it was different. It was closely connected just with their function. It's almost like in a Roman Catholic Church where the Pope speaks at ex cathedra. He speaks for the entire church and as a personification of the theology. And it is unmutable. It's given. So yes, there was, in that respect, I would say that there was a knowledge of that. In Christianity, it got influenced by Hellenism and got completely different meaning later. But I hope I am answering the question.
I think so. Anybody else before I go on?
But if there are follow-up questions, we can ask.
Maureen, if you didn't ask that question, follow up. Don't be afraid to follow up. I'm looking out.
We have plenty of time.
Yes. I have a question from myself. We're smack dab.
2 minutes.
We're smack dab. Don't listen to him, Nadim. Actually, there's no way for anyone to start the timer except me, right? Thank you. We're smack dab in the middle of Lent. Mm-hmm. I enjoy Lent as a time for me to give up something. And I am generally lining up with your theology and your approach to different things very well, except for when it comes to Lent, and except when it comes toward giving something up for Lent. We always butt heads about this. You don't believe in this idea of giving something up. Tell me why.
No. There are two ways of approaching it, Peter. One thing is that Presbyterians, I shared it a number of times in our church, Presbyterians started by their rebellion against the Lent. It's not that well known, but Huldrych Zwingli, who was the first Swiss reformer before John Calvin, in Zurich, the Reformation started by the friends of his friends, radical thinking theologians, gathered on the first Sunday of Lent, and they took an Wurst, that means sausage, cut it into slices, made it into hosts, and they partook of the Wurst, which was a capital offense under Roman Catholic law, and so on. And that was the beginning of Swiss Reformation. We are followers of the Swiss Reformation. What else would you expect from us? There is a famous saying that I think coming from, he might be quoting someone, but Thomas Garrick Masaryk, the founder of my Czech Republic, he said that the states are sustained by the principles upon which they were founded. And in that way, churches are sustained upon the principles or upon the impulses upon which they were founded. And we are against this kind of imposed from outside of rules or spiritual expectations or something like that. We do give up things for Lent. And I can tell you now, start the timer again. I can tell you now what I was really very nicely surprised by my colleagues who started on Facebook or some social media sharing that kind of meme among the mostly Calvinists in the United States, giving up bad theology for Lent. And they have a lovely poster, like church. Imagine having it in front of the Rutgers Church, a big poster, like transparent, really, you know, going across the whole facade. And each Sunday is giving up something from the bad theology, you know, like giving up the biblical literalism and giving up the hell and giving up this. You probably heard just now that even the Pope is giving up the bad theology of hell. That was a news, I think, today or yesterday when he said that, you know, we are not believing in it any longer. You know, so that is what I'll definitely be giving up. And in Bible class, we were just reading that part from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is saying to his disciples regarding the shows of the public shows of the faith. You know, like saying, don't be like those hypocrites who, when they fast, they mutilate themselves. Or I'm now kind of, so that everyone knows that they are fasting. You know, no, you put the best makeup, or cologne, or something like that. Or when you are praying, don't be like those hypocrites, but go into your room, close the door, and pray, and so on. And if you are giving alms, don't do it publicly. I'm having those wild gestures.
Mic malfunction.
Yeah,
yes.
Microphone is sliding from my tie. So don't be like, making big show of your generosity.
Right.
Do it so that your other hand does not know what the other one is doing.
Yeah.
So that is probably quite close also to definitely to my ethos, and generally would be close to say Presbyterian ethos or Calvinist ethos.
Okay. Next question, unless we have one from the audience, no. Do you think there is a way we will be reunited with those we love after death?
Why not? I have no way of knowing.
Right.
I can tell you that in a biblical tradition, which I take seriously, there are at least, let me put it this way, there are several ways of thinking about it. And also just guessing from the other faith traditions, there is this general understanding that it is reality in one way or another. They are quite different in those ways of thinking about it, but that's the essence of religion to some degree. Especially secular anthropologists will tell you this, that this is one of the founding principles when they start seeing the funeral rituals and so on. They are saying religion is in play. That's the beginning of the religion. And, so why to oppose it? How? I don't know. I like, here I'll be heretical now, but I like the way, at least partly what I read about from Mary Kavena Pukui, an author of Hawaiian anthropologist, the way Hawaiians were approaching it. They had leaping places. Each island had a leaping place. When person passed away, there was this kind of an idea, at least the way she is describing it, that the soul would meet with a guardian, the family guardian, who will take that person to that leaping place. And they'll be leaping from that place to the outside world, to those ancestors, to join them there. And Big Island had actually 3 leaping places because it is a big island, but smaller islands had at least 1 always. And there is a danger also that those who were bereaved, the family of the person who passed away, in their thinking had a way of keeping that person or that soul around, almost like enslaving that person by not letting them go, not allowing them to leap. And that gave them control and some benefits, but in a general terms, in the thinking of those, we would say in our language probably most theologically enlightened, it was frowned upon. It was not a good way of dealing with it. And almost like letting go and allowing the people to really pass and leap. And I find in that specific wisdom. You know, you can find that here and there elsewhere as well. I think that in Christianity you can find some of it too. But here it is so very nicely expressed. And so, yes.
Slavery went on for a couple of thousand years. When did the Christian church decide that slavery, when did they start wising up that it was wrong to control someone in religious terms, not in political terms?
Timer.
This is an area where I am not that familiar. Of course, it started among the with great awakenings around the world with evangelicals, really, in Great Britain, and then it migrated to the United States. This major opposition to the slavery as it developed in the modern world. Yes, slavery was an institution which is cross-cultural and across time. Unfortunately, slavery is a reality of these days as well, keeping people from, being free and there are also different forms of slavery. So, like biblical slavery is probably substantially different from plantation slavery in down south. That was different from the slavery here up north, at least some. But similarly, it can be said about the ancient slavery that there was a difference between house slaves in Hellenistic times and those who were farm slaves or mining slaves. And those were substantial different outcomes for those people there. So being a house slave would be almost equivalent to being an employee these days, sort of. While being a farm slave would be similar to indentured servitude, and being in the mines would be like under Stalin and Gulag, or forced labor under Nazism, or like the situation down south, with much shortened lifespan and miserable bare surviving, and abuse and all of that. For the complexity of that, now, we are over 2 minutes and so on, but simply for complexity of that, I think that people who were thinking about it simply said, it's too difficult to explain it to anyone or to many people. Just let us ban it altogether. That's the best way. Because otherwise we will be spending definitely more than 2 minutes explaining it. John, how it is in politics. If something is difficult to explain, you need to figure out how to say it in one sentence. Otherwise, no one would pay attention. So. Religiously, I am trying to answer. So there were different, and here, let us do a little bit of Bible class.
Okay, 2 minutes.
No, 2 minutes. That's the problem which still people have against the Paul, that he returned the escaped slave. They are holding it against him. But that is not really fully understanding what is happening back there. To reconstruct most plausibly what happened was that slave caused some harm to his owner. We don't know what it was, but it was something substantial, like wrecking, I don't know, windmill, or something, or sinking ship, or something of that kind. And in order to, he ran to Paul as an arbiter. He ran to Paul as an arbiter to be his advocate, to protect him. And because he knew that for his owner, Paul was a figure of authority. And that was the best person to be an advocate in these kind of situations. And so he ran to Paul for this purpose. And purpose of Paul was to allow that situation to be settled. And Paul not only wrote that letter and clearly achieved the settling of that original cause, which was caused, but he also very strongly encouraged that owner to release that slave and send that slave to him as a free person. So you see that it's complex there. And that was most likely that kind of not industrial slave, even though I gave the examples of more industrial harm he might cause. Mm-hmm. But it was most likely a house slave, which would be an equivalent to our employee, and therefore that return and all these exchanges played a clear role. To give you an example, almost all medical doctors, for instance, in Hellenistic times, were slaves. Wow. As high-trained Greek medical doctors for Romans were, for instance, famous, and they went for big bucks. They were quite expensive, and you can imagine that this situation really was like that. That harm might not be a sinking of a ship, might be The other would be veterinarian, because that was kind of interconnected. And, this slave caused or was accused of causing a beloved horse dying to his owner, say, or something of that kind. Or I'm here more speculating now, but kind of trying to give you a taste that it was really different or substantially different from what was American slavery.
Right. All right, let's try and get in as many as we can.
There are some questions over there.
Oh, wait, we have some, yes. But wait, before that, I must ask a question from an anonymous question from the audience. This is sort of kind of a follow-up to another one that was asked. And as a pastor, some of these questions don't have answers that are clear, but these are the kind of questions that people have, and they want an answer, even though if it's not the definitive answer, it's not the answer that, there's some things we don't know, but
yeah.
Will all our pets be in heaven with us?
Why not? It depends how you look at it, but in this respect, I will confess that to some degree I'm a Christian animist. Okay, and being Christian animist, I don't see the reason for not.
You want to explain if people don't know what that word means? It means like nature, animal, almost
animism,
mystical.
Animism sees the things around us as having an anima, which is a soul. You have it directly in the word of animal. Animal is a creature with this form of soul. Okay. And in animism, it would go further. They would have mountains with a soul, or they'll have forests with the souls, and so on. I need to approach that gingerly and cautiously a little, but there is, it's a worldview which is appealing to me. And having been on different mountains, and I'm now preparing a sermon about climbing mountains or spiritual mountaineering, I can tell you that each mountain has a different spirit, has a different feel for it, those I climbed. And I can imagine that, each tree has its own special feeling. Yeah.
Beautiful, but we must move on. That was the time. If you were given carte blanche to design a worship service in the exact way you would want it to be, without any worry of appeasing to a congregation, what would that look like? Start the timer, and we're going to be really hard on this one because he could spend a long time on
it. We've done that. We went for the one example comes to my mind. We were thinking of attending the service during holidays. I'm coming again to Ka'u district of Hawaii. There was a splinter church which splintered, and so they started worshiping under what would be almost like a little chapel in a cemetery. We misread that, or they simply advertised in between they unified or whatever happened. We came there was no one there, but in the chapel there was one Bible, And I was there with my wife, hoping that there'll be a service, and there was not service, and so we made a service. And I think that that is the thing which all Presbyterians should be encouraged. Or we have a universal priesthood of believers. So, you know, I'm doing it all the time, that I'm having my devotions or my own services for myself, for our family, or and you are encouraged to do the same, all of us. You know, it's similar to Roman Catholic priests, but you don't, in Presbyterian Church, you don't need to be consecrated for that, who are celebrating their own masses in their own apartments or whatever, using breviary, or however it's pronounced in English, you know, the prayer books or something like that. And you know that I have my prayer books, and I'm reading it in a church for those smaller services we have. But, you know, I can expand. When I have time, I will look into those suggested biblical texts, and sometimes I will. My worship can include pulling out the commentary and trying to read a little bit more about it. Say, you know, it has. But I'll have my ukulele and I'll play a song. That would be the other part of that. Coming from the tradition where I am coming from, the definitely singing would be a part of every meeting. Every committee would start and close not with a prayer, but with a singing.
And I think that our sunrise service is very close to what you're talking about, right? It's a beautiful, very simple, ukulele-filled service. This is an ad for it. On Easter Sunday at 6:30 a.m. on the roof of Rutgers Church.
If it is not raining, otherwise we'll be somewhere inside.
Maureen just said, well, we're not going to go into this again, Maureen, I'm sorry, but Gregory of Nyssa had a theology of freedom which denied slavery. So, 14th century? Don't ask that. We're not going to get back into the slavery thing. This is our final question, unless we have anything from the audience. It's from me.
No, but I want to return to that slavery.
Timer.
No, it's absolutely correct. There were definitely churches or people of faith who were from the get-go very deeply opposed to slavery, and some of those would be definitely part of my tradition from Czech Republic, from the 15th century, Hasites. And others would be Waldensians, which would go to the 12th century, who were opposed to anything. And these movements, these radical Christianities, were also very social justice oriented. So, you know, here answering some of that liberal or political ideas John asked about, you know, I drank that with the milk. Mm-hmm. I was brought up on it in some respect. So yes, there definitely Franciscans would not have slaves, or at least the ancient Franciscans. That will be the same period like Waldensians and so on. So yes,
Thank you for ending early. This is my last question, but it'll be a follow-up if we have time. And again, nobody else? Here we go. I advertise this church to people sometimes as the most unchurchy church. And they are often very intrigued at that moment. But I wanted to know how you feel about that moniker, or whatever that would be, unchurchy church?
Ecclesia is the word for church, okay? And ecclesia means people called together. And wherever we are called together and following Christ, that's church. Unfortunately, this church business over the centuries accumulated a lot of baggage.
Right.
And getting rid of some of that baggage is the main problem. And making it clear that we are trying to stay away from that baggage, or that we will not dump it on people and so on. What is really difficult here in New York City is that those who are looking for church are usually looking for church for conservative reasons.
Right.
Because if they are in New York City, they are absolutely happy of not having a church they knew from, say, Kansas or from Tennessee or, those more conservative places. So they are in New York finally free. So they are not looking for church. And if there are some for different reasons, then they start to look for church which is, again, more conservative. And so it is kind of very interesting mismatch right here. I must say that to some degree it was easier, say, to be a progressive liberal church in upstate New York because we were kind of sticking out more. While over here, those churches which are sticking out are usually those more conservative.
Mm-hmm. Wait, John wants to say something.
I can't think of his name now, but he's a famous guy in the Catholic Church who's been fighting the church now for years. And he wants to throw everything out and go back to the 1st and 2nd century where Christianity was new and people got together and they didn't have all these rules. What would you think about going back to the early church?
You are describing reformers. That was there, at least to some degree. That was what the Reformation attempted to do. Under the influence of humanism, which was ad fontes, returning to the source. And that was what they were trying to do, really. And it gave us, on the other hand, Protestants, it gave us that... in the end, it created a different kind of baggage, John, because with their going back to the sources, they went back to the biblical sources. And going back to the biblical sources, they started to fight over the interpretation of the Bible. And they started to be more and more fundamentalistic or literalistic in reading the Bible. And here you have the problem with a modern Protestant or evangelical fundamentalism or literalism, where they are, saying Bible is true and exactly how it is written, not recognizing. And we are getting many of these reactions on our YouTube channel, for instance, and then so on. And just trying to explain, it cannot be all absolutely true because there are so many contradictions, for instance, that it cannot simply be, and so on and so forth. But, yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming, and we're going to do this again. We have to keep this going because this is where we get the answers. And thank you for being a good sport, as always.
Thank you for your
See
patience
you next
with
time.
me. Thank you.